Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi man wala. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله اللهم علمنا من علمك ما ترضى به عنا ولا تؤاخذنا بما تعلم منا يا حليم خلقنا بخلق الحلم وحققنا بحقائق العلم سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي صلى الله عليه وسلم محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. جزاكم الله خير everyone for coming out. I know there's a lot going on in the community, so for you guys to like turn down Souk Social and Dali Mujahid and everyone else, whatever else is going on in the community, may Allah bless you guys. The topic for tonight, inshallah, is modesty in the age of hypersexuality. It's a hot topic, and we wouldn't just talk to the women the whole night. I'm just joking. But I think before we even start the conversation of what is modesty and what do we say about the culture, can we just define what modesty is?
Sure. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wa salatu wa salam ala sayyidil anbiya mursaleen nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. I did spend a lot of time trying to look up in the definition of haya. I came across Imam Ghazali's definition in Ihya, which I found very beautiful, and I want to share with all of you. It is a type of pain beyond the pain of criticism and malicious intent. It is a noble trait that develops in early childhood when the light of reason begins to shine, leading one to be shy of improper actions when witnessed by others. This is a praiseworthy trait, as the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, shyness is all good, and this hadith is in Muslim. Shyness is a branch of faith, and this hadith is in Bukhari and Muslim. And then my addition, that indeed Allah loves the wealthy servant who is humble and discreet, and this hadith is also in Muslim. And when we look at this definition, we find that he didn't discuss any ahkam, right? He didn't discuss any rulings. Modesty is a very personal trait, just like zuhud. So we had a conversation on zuhud when we did financial literacy, right?
Yes.
So this idea of zuhud is something that is in the heart, right? This idea of my relationship with wealth. Now, this relationship with my presentation, that is essentially what modesty is, and this is what haya is. So I think that's probably a good place to start. And then, does it overlap with religious rulings? Yes, I do. Does it completely overlap? I don't think so.
So we live in a society that is very different than historically what it once was. What is okay socially now is very different than even like 50 years ago. And that has affected and seeped into everything in our culture, where it doesn't matter what you're wearing or how you're wearing, and it doesn't matter who you're wearing it in front of. If you look at videos or pictures from like the 30s, men wore three-piece suits. Little boys, I'm talking about the West, not Muslim majority countries. Little boys, construction workers, everyone did this, not just because it was a social standard, but because there was a level of decorum, a level of shyness that you had, and respect that you had for yourself and for society at large. And so if society has changed, where everyone is wired to think about how I feel, but also my feelings then motivate what I'm doing, and there aren't any social norms or decorum that restricts or mandates a certain type of behavior or action or clothing, then it makes things interesting. Particularly for us as Muslims that are trying to merge between this East and West, where we have a Sharia that tells us the boundaries that we're supposed to live in, and then we're trying to figure out what that middle part looks like. And so, yes, we have religious mandates, but as Sheikh Farhan was mentioning, shyness really is an internal thing. It's a disposition. It's less about social implications on me and more about how I feel internally. And so I think it's interesting to how can we think about or talk about shyness now, today, when the world is telling us that we should be everything but shy?
So you touched on a really important point, which happens to be around motivation. And I think, this idea of sex sells, I don't think it's necessarily a new idea. I think the way it's manifested, I agree with you 100%. Saying that, how does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala motivate men to paradise? Right? It's a very honest question. The fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises men hur ayn, that this is something that will motivate them to get into paradise, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't motivate women with the same things. And if we understand that there are these different motivations for both genders, it doesn't make one motivation wrong and the other one right. right? And it's important for us to understand that this is more Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's statement of the natural inclinations of both sexes. And it's important for us to understand that. Why? Because once we embrace and understand that, it becomes a lot easier for us to deal with it. The problem that also exists in the same era is like, okay, no, you shouldn't think like that, right? This is not the way that you're programmed. No, this is something that men should have complete control over it. And what I find interesting is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He orders men, He says that lower your gaze. For women, He gives them 2 orders. What are those 2 orders? He says lower your gaze and cover. And if you look at the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he talks about intimacy, he says to the woman, right? He sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's not talking to the man. He said that the woman who denies her husband, that the angels curse her until morning. And when I look at these ayat and these hadith, it very much tells me about the power scale when it comes to sexuality and how it tips toward women. And they're the gatekeepers. They're the ones who have control. And I don't mean to get very raw here. If you find like promiscuity, would you imagine it to be higher in the homosexual community or in the heterosexual community? Do you guys know? It's actually higher in the homosexual community. Not only is it higher, multiple partners is more common in the homosexual community. Like, why is that? Because men are not gatekeepers the same way that women are. And again, this address to women is to show them like, hey, there's power here. This is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you leverage in. Don't abuse that power. And men, what has He given them preference in? This physical ability and physical strength. And had majority of men what they wanted, if they wanted to overpower women, they had the power to do that. Not to say it doesn't happen. It does happen in society. There's no doubt about it. But it doesn't happen to the amount we would imagine it to. Right? If you have a majority of men who are physically stronger and larger than women, you should find that a majority of them are taking advantage of those same women. But that's not the case. And that's not what's happening. So I think embracing this fact and this idea of motivations and how it's different for both sexes, and how do we manifest that and how do we deal with that in a meaningful way is a really important conversation.
Oof. We're talking about genders and the inclinations, motivations of the genders.
There's legally only 2 now, so we're good.
Regardless, I think it's important that we recognize this in our conversation about modesty. Because if we don't, then we'll only be lying to ourselves and dancing around a real truth. Men, yes, are far more physically oriented, and men and women have the power to do that. You know, it's interesting. So I've heard one of my teachers mention, I wrote about actually in my last blog post, or the one before it, if men are responsible for qawama, they're responsible for, as I like to translate as humble servant leadership. They're responsible for the strength, the pillars of the household. The superpower, the strength that women have is hadana, it's care, it's nurturing, it's the soft sciences versus the hard physical sciences. And so when we're talking about modesty, what you're mentioning is actually super important. And then it also shows how it is that we need to interact independently, but then together. Independently, I need to understand as a man, just because I have physical strength over someone doesn't mean I can overpower them. Likewise, as a woman, just because I'm more beautiful or have the ability to, like the same way a man can use physical strength to overpower a woman, women can use beauty and use
her feminine strengths
to manipulate a man. Yeah. And I think this is a really important part of the conversation as well.
And when we talk about power, right? Power is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always addresses in a positive way. You know, if you have any discussion of quwwah, if you have any discussion of preference, these issues are things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always presents in a positive manner and in a positive way. And anytime these things are misused, what do we call them? Abuse. We call them dhulm, right? We call it oppression. So anytime something good is not used in the way that it is supposed to be used, that it only can be used in an oppressive way. So if we have an understanding that, okay, the Sharia has set guidelines in how are we supposed to physically present ourselves. The Sharia has set guidelines in how we are to interact. How does that translate into society? So I would ask then, historically, as Muslims, did we live in segregated societies? Like, men and women have to interact. Do you guys know how many entrances there were to Masjid Nabawi? No. You don't? Okay. Well, today we find out together. Who knows? During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, how many entrances were there? It's one.
Because the women couldn't go to the masjid.
Allahu Akbar. They were praying in closets?
Yes. We gave them the closet in the back.
The Prophet ﷺ, he said gave a very clear command that لا تمنعوا أماء الله من مساجد الله. He says, don't prevent the believing women from going to the masjid. And if men and women are going to the same masjid, they're entering through the same entrance, well, what's going to happen? There's going to be interaction. There's also a very famous hadith that, so if you have a room like this, do you guys know how the rows are supposed to line up? So like if we all stood to pray right now, and assuming that the qibla is in this direction, how do the men line up? Right, in the middle, and then the rows start moving back. How do women line up? It starts from the back, ahsant, right? So it starts from the back and it moves forward, meaning that if I come late, I'm going to be closer to the women, or if I'm a female, I'm going to be closer to the men. There were two youth who used to come late on purpose. This was when? During the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And when we talk about ayat like lowering your gaze, hiding your beauty, Allahumma musta'an.
No comment.
Was that Freudian?
Nope.
What do you call that?
Nope.
Freudian slip?
Nope. Nope.
All right. When we talk about don't go near zina, who was the first audience? It was the companions. And these two youth, they used to come late, and during the salah, they would actually actively try to look at each other. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, we have 3 public cases of zina, meaning that there are people who came forward and admitted that we committed adultery. And if we know that this happened and people are admitting to it, what does that also tell us? That it's happening privately and well, and people aren't sharing. So, I'm not here to remove this romantic image that we have of the past. Like, I'm not here to dissuade that at all, right? Were the companions the best of creation after the Anbiya? Absolutely. I truly believe that in my heart. But we also have to understand that they were human. And the challenges that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala presents to them, yes, we feel that it is harder for us. We feel it is more difficult for us. But they face those challenges too. And it's important for us to take them as a model to understand how that translates into how we deal with each other today.
It's interesting, the modern way that we look at modesty is that it is externally imposed. That government or external things stipulate what modesty is. So when we go to the masjid, the men's section, women's section are completely separate. You don't see women. When we think about modesty, they usually think of niqab or burqa and abaya and these things.
Yeah.
And while that is fine, it completely removes the internal motivation to be modest. Yeah. And then it externalizes the responsibility of modesty. It externalizes the need for us to figure out a way to work together. Now, unfortunately, I've never been to Egypt, but I love hearing about or any Muslim majority country or any country in the world, period. Men and women get on the bus, and guess what's gonna happen? You gotta sit next to somebody, or you're gonna stand up next to someone. I remember me and Sheikh Farhan made Hajj one year. Actually, the year before I made Hajj with him.
This was Hobo Hajj or after?
This was pre-Hobo Hajj.
Pre-Hobo, okay.
Yeah. Alhamdulillah, we made Hajj together a few times. I was in the tawaf, in the crusher. So inside where Maqam Ibrahim is, and the door of the Kaaba. And I'm just making my tawaf, and we call it the crusher because it's like so much pressure. And next thing you know, I'm literally leaning. I can't stand up by myself. And this little Indonesian woman's like, Ittaqillah, Ittaqillah. I was like, Malish. I can't do anything. I'm just leaning on you. This is the haram.
Yeah.
This is at the Kaaba is like there.
Our holiest site.
The holiest site.
Yeah.
it happens. We have to, as a society, where now modesty is a completely externalized thing, even in our community, we think that no, men and women should never be around each other. In order for us to be modest, we have to be able to challenge that and recognize that modesty starts with inside of me. And I should want to be modest. And then I have to define within the bounds of Sharia, what does modesty look like for me? No. Sharia gives us very basic standards for men and women dress. And dress is not all of modesty. Modesty is so much more than that. But for dress, men and women have the same basic standards. Has to cover your whole body except for your hands and your feet. That's for a woman. Has to cover your whole body from navel to knee for a man. Can't be specific for the other gender. Should not be see-through. Should not be skin tight. It can't be specific for a different religion. Those are clothing standards. Social interaction should never be alone with the opposite gender. Should not be together with lustful intentions. طيب. How do we do with the rest of the world? When you go to work? How do you do with when you want to have some style with your clothes? How do you do with what happens when, and our fiqh books even talk about this, when someone is socially very attractive? They were born this way. What should they do versus someone who's more senior in age, who people aren't looking at anymore? And so we have to figure out, what does modesty look like for us in every aspect of our lives, in clothing, but also in disposition, in decorum. Because something that actually we talked about, this is a good segue, is that a lot of times in our Muslim community, we follow all the rules and we're like, according to the textbook, very modest, and we can be incredibly immodest. Yeah. We could be like, I have my thobe on, I have my abaya, my hijab on, but everything about my dress, and more importantly, everything about my actions is incredibly unmodest.
There's a young man that had approached me one time and he was like, Sheikh, like, how can you allow this event where there are men and women together? I was like, okay, well, what are some of the challenges that you see and how would you like me to address it? He's like, well, it's possible that, you know, a couple comes out of this and they commit zina. I said, that's a real possibility and that can't exist. I said, but do you mind if I challenge you? He said, sure. I said, if I wanted to commit zina, would the masjid be my first choice? And he was like, you know, still we should prevent it. I said, you know, can I flip that coin a little bit? I said, just like you're saying that zina is a potential possibility out of this, I said, you know what the other possibility is that a lot of people fear discussing and talking about? He's like, what? I said, marriage. If I don't see the opposite gender, if I don't have access to them at all, right? So I'm not talking about this, the type of access that would lead to flirting, that would lead to unnecessary conversation, right? And when we deal with the opposite gender, I like, so I actually got this from one of the chaplains in Jersey. He said, keep it public, keep it purposeful, and keep it precise, right? If I have to deal with the opposite gender, make sure that that conversation is public. Make sure there's a purpose behind it. I needed something, maybe there's a project that we're working on together, maybe I had a question, and keep it precise. Don't get into unnecessary and extra speech because it falls very quickly into flirting, right? It can move very quickly into that space. And zina is one of those sins that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's one of the few places He uses la taqrabu, right? Like don't even go near it. He doesn't say the same thing about alcohol. He doesn't say the same thing about eating pig. He doesn't say the same thing about lying and stealing, but He says it about zina because it's a very slippery slope. And I'm sure many of you have interacted with the opposite gender, and maybe we've interacted in a way that wasn't the most appropriate. And we could see the moment where the conversation slipped into a space and a place where it shouldn't have slipped. But again, these are very internal things, right? If I'm in public and I'm speaking in a way that is purposeful, that is precise, that is professional, I've done very little to entice the person in front of me. Now, whether that person is enticed or not, right, that's between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I know, right, every single one of us knows, when am I flirting, right? That's a question that I know I can answer. The moment that I'm engaged with a woman, I know the moment that I'm code switching, and I know the moment that I'm trying to engage in a flirtatious way because I want that attention, because it's something that I'm seeking from them. And this is why modesty is such an important internal gauge.
I want to inform the men of something very, very serious, building off what Sheikh Farhan said. Because you think a woman is pretty and she's nice, does not mean she's into you. I know that's hard to accept, but it's a reality. She did not ask to be born this way, and she's just trying to be nice. And I think that's really important for guys because we are like very physically motivated to understand, because the lady at the coffee counter is like, "Salam alaikum," or "How are you doing?" It's not like, "Yo, found my wife. That's it. She's into me, bro." And I've had these conversations before. We have to make sure that how we're even thinking has to be appropriate and also has to be practical. That just because someone you find attractive doesn't mean. The same thing goes. If you know that you're socially attractive, because everyone understands pretty privilege. If you know that you're socially attractive and you carry yourself in a way that lends oneself toward being flirtatious, don't be mad when all the guys are googly-eyed. Because there are ways that one can play up and play down how they interact and how they are. Men know it, women know it. We don't even have to go into details. And so when we're talking about modesty, we have to, again, define for ourselves what that's going to be, and then also allow ourselves a space to grow within the level of modesty that we have. And we need to set a frame of reference for ourselves. I know for me, I know for you as well, how do I know if I'm being modest or not? For me, it's, will my wife be happy with how I'm carrying myself? Let me get myself together. I gotta stop doing too much. Because sometimes thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like too far-fetched for us. It's unimaginable.
Or it could be halal, right? But you know she doesn't like it.
No, that's even, that's most
Right?
of it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But that for me is a means of like self-regulation. Like, okay, I need to tone it back a little bit. And that allows me to do what Ibn Mas'ud said, I put between every halal thing and haram thing, extra level of haram. That allows me to be what? Modest.
Even this idea of presentability, I think that's something that's an important conversation as well, because you'll have a number of young women who will say like, okay, well, I can't be presentable. Like, should I not be able to dress up? Should I not be able to look nice? And that's fine, honestly. You know, the sahabiyat, they used to go out of the home and they would wear kuhl. Kuhl is a type of beautification. And not just a type of beautification, it's something that is actually attractive.
We call them hurul ain. Why?
So the question then comes is like, all right, well, where do I draw that line? And I will advise most women, like, okay, hey, listen, you want to go out, be presentable. The nice thing I actually like about Western culture is I would say the makeup in Western culture is a lot more toned down than it is in Eastern cultures. For sure. Like Eastern culture is a lot brighter colors. It's a lot more flamboyant. In Western cultures, it's much more skin tones that you find. Like even with the lipstick, like you won't see sharp reds. You won't see a lot of the things, and a lot of it is just exaggerating existing features. But what I will advise is, when you look in the mirror, right? Like all of you females, like you know exactly what it is when you look in the mirror, like what it is that you're trying to do. Am I trying to cover up blemishes? Am I trying to look presentable, or am I trying to look attractive? Right, and that's an honest conversation that sometimes is very hard, right? It's very difficult. With men, it's not that big of an issue because we don't have that command, right? That command doesn't come toward men.
Speak for yourself.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. I mean, I know that's what your wife commands you, but still, like, and not just that, like a man to take pride in how he looks is something that the Prophet ﷺ commanded us with. Right? In Allah jameel wa yuhibbul jamal. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beautiful and He loves beautiful things. And not just that, a way for us to show thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to show the blessings that He has given us. If I'm paid well, if I have a good job, that needs to show when I go out. Right? I shouldn't be wearing ripped, tattered clothing. That's not expressing my thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because it's not representative of the position and the status that He's given me. Right? I have to be in a presentable way. I have to look nice. Because that is my way of showing thanks to Allah Azza wa Jal.
And I think also it's beyond even clothes. I mean, we can see men can wear like muscle shirts, right, and be really jacked and intentionally want the attention that comes from eyes at looking at them. Women can use their privileges to their advantage as well. But also there are things that go beyond what we can control. And more importantly, how we conduct ourselves can differentiate between modesty and immodesty. And I think that is one of the shortfalls. If Sheikh Farhan's saying like the makeup is less here in the West versus the East, one of the differences between the West and the East is how we conduct ourselves in public. There are expectations and standards in more traditional Eastern cultures that will dictate and determine how it is that men and women engage with themselves. I always know when someone is either not grew up here or has really fobby parents, if both men and women won't look me in the eyes. They'll always look slightly off to the side. The guys because they respect me, the women because it's a way to lower their gaze. And then how we are going to interact with each other, the level of shyness that we have around each other, both men and women. And so it's one thing to talk and make the conversation focus around clothing, but I think equally, if not more important, is disposition. How do we allow ourselves to joke? How do we allow ourselves to interact? How do we allow ourselves to be around? Is it flirtatious or is it just merely being human? Are we just naturally funny or are we looking to get aroused, get attention from someone out of that? One thing is this: Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made you a jovial person. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made you a funny person, a comedic person. It's another thing, and we all know, and this is between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when that tension changes. And reality is that a lot of what we're talking about is dealing in the gray areas. So much of it is really between me and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I have to check for myself. So much can be halal. We all know when our intentions go from being halal to lustful. You are in the coffee shop. I'm just using coffee shops because both of our masajid have coffee shops. You went in the coffee shop to buy coffee. You saw the person that was attractive, and now you did a little extra. Both men and women do it. You found a way to get in their eyesight. You found a way to spark up a conversation. You found a way to creep them out, because that happens as well. We have to ask ourselves, like, when did that intention change? Because that is no longer modest. That's no longer shy, and that now becomes lustful. That becomes immodest.
This idea of like vulnerability and self-honesty, it's just so, it's so important because of how closely it's tied to ikhlas and sincerity. You know, when I'm approaching someone of the opposite gender, okay, am I in a position to get married, right? So I have some of these college kids like, yo, Shay, I'm trying to get married. It's like, no, you're not. Like, you're not trying to get married. It's like, have you spoken to your parents? Are your parents willing to support you? Are they going to take care of all the expenses? Is she okay with that? Right? These are honest conversations that need to happen, and we can't move on just based on attraction, right? Because that's not the only gauge, and that's not the only filtration I should have. Is it important? Yes, right? I'm not here to deny that at all, because for men at least, that is the first gauge, right? That's the first thing. Like, am I attracted to her? In general, what you'll find from guys is how does she look, and from girls, what does he do, right? In general. Because that is how men are motivated, right? And women are motivated by stability. And I think these are very important conversations. And I think these are very important aspects to be aware of. But this idea of being honest and knowing where I am and asking myself, before I approach that person, or before I ask about that person, why am I asking? Why am I approaching? And that the reason that it's so difficult to deal with that answer is because it causes us to reflect and being like, I'm just being a jerk. I'm just being lustful. Right? I'm doing something I know that I shouldn't be doing, and I'm afraid to confront myself because I don't like what I'm seeing in my spiritual mirror. Like, nobody likes looking in the spiritual mirror and being like, no, I'm just being a barbarian right now, right? Like, nobody likes seeing that. Nobody likes looking into that. Like, nobody likes looking into the mirror and saying like, oh, I'm just being lustful right now. But the reality is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us these hearts so that we can look into those mirrors, so that we can reflect, so that we can see when we are making those wrong decisions, and these are the steps to prevent us from getting there. And if I am honest, and if I am interested in that person, yalla bismillah, I'm not doing anything haram, right? Like, again, that's an honest conversation. It's like, man, the brothers always ask me like, yo, Shay, like, where am I supposed, like, where can I find the women and blah, blah, blah. I was like, at events like these. She's coming to a religious event. Whether she wears hijab or not, she's wearing it here, and she's covered. She's interested in a speaker. It's a Friday night, right? Like, for the men out there, I don't understand what more it is that you're looking for. I'm being very honest. Like, these are huge and major green flags. After that, okay, you know what I mean? Have conversation. What are the things that you agree on? What are the things that you disagree on? Are these negotiable? Are they not negotiable? But again, being honest with ourselves, that is a huge part of sincerity. It's a huge part of sincerity. And I promise most of you this, not all of you, you will not find your wife at Shadid. You're not going to find your wife at Qamariya. You're not going to find your wife at these places. Will you find a boyfriend and girlfriend? Yes, you will, if that's what you're looking for. But that's a conversation you need to have with yourself. But if you're looking for someone to spend your life with, then I suggest you go into those places that are going to bring you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because one of the purposes of marriage is to marry someone who's going to take me there and help me get there.
I think a final point before we open up for Q&A is what Sheikh Farhan is talking about, this introspection. Really analyzing and doing this muhasabah of who am I, what am I doing, where am I going, and where is this leading me to? A part of that conversation shouldn't just be focused, or the conversation shouldn't just be focused on public, because that's very easy to focus on. We can be modest in public, but who's going to show their Explorer page right now? Who's going to show us like what's on your TikTok reel?
Who's going to show us your Salam's profile?
Your Salam's profile. Well, they probably already saw it. But I think what we do in private is equally, if not more important than what we do in public. Because what we do in private is going to reflect what we do in public. We can't hide from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who we are. And just because no one else is seeing it, don't think that it doesn't have an effect on our souls. Don't think that it doesn't affect how I think about the world. If we're looking at things that are immodest, if we're not having shyness with ourselves and with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, don't think that now it is when we get into society, we won't think differently. You know, we were having a conversation before we started about how typically when men get older and they're not married, they become more picky. They've seen more. They've experienced more. And so now it's like their taste has been more fine-tuned. They're less willing to be generous and humble with each other. And that's really problematic. And so I think we also need to have a conversation with ourselves as to, are we being modest in private when no one else sees? Lord.
I was going to say, one issue that we completely haven't even discussed is access to pornography and how big an issue and a bigger problem is.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, Allah mustaan. Allah protect us and our children. I think there are a lot of people who have a lot of free time, and that aids to that. So I would give the first piece of advice I would give, especially to young men, which is not to say that this isn't a problem with women, but it is mostly a problem with young men, is like stay busy, like enroll in clubs, get a hobby, spend time with your friends, try to stay off your phone as much as you can. By the time you get home, you should be exhausted, right? Like you don't want to open your phone. You want to go to sleep. Try to avoid social media. There's not a lot of good things that are on there. And this is coming from someone who loves social media, right? I have access to books, to durus, to mashayikh, like I never would have thought I would have access to. Like I think social media is amazing, but it has to be used in the right way, right? It's a tool just like any tool. And if I find myself not using it the right way, delete it. Like just delete the account, right? Because the more exposure I give myself, the more of that dopamine rush I'm gonna get. Right? And it's just going to create this really bad negative feedback loop in my heart, and this is not going to lead me to any khair.
I think that's a good point to put a pin in it and open up for Q&A, inshallah. So okay, anyone that tells you that because you were being fitna, you should migrate to another country, do not listen to them. Wallahi, don't listen to them.
Because I'm going to tell you a secret. There are women over there too.
No. So many jokes. And I'm not trying to belittle whatever sheikh told you that. Allah bless him and guide him, but that's ignorant. We lived in Mecca for 10 years. There are plenty of women. You know what they did? They wore abaya. This is before the colors came in, before niqab came off. This is old school. This is 2007, 2016. You know what the women did there? They found ways to be attractive. You know what's even worse? Because you didn't see anything, you're like, bro, why is she eating a socks on, bro? Astaghfirullah. You're gonna see fitna. You're human. You can't do anything about that.
Not just that. As a man, you adapt.
Yeah.
Right? So if all you can see her eyes, what are you gonna look at? You're gonna look at her eyes. If all you can see is her wrist, what are you gonna look at? You're gonna look at her wrist, right? It's amazing how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has programmed man, right? Like as men, you will always be attracted to women. Always, right? That is the default. What part of her you'll be attracted to is what society allows to be displayed. And it doesn't matter where you are. I promise you that.
I'll be even more vulnerable and honest with you. The problem is inside of us and not society. When my wife was pregnant and I used to go to the gym, if I saw trash, I was like, stuff a trash bag. It's a black trash bag.
Yeah.
That's a me issue.
Yeah.
That's not a society issue. So what do you do if you see fitna? You say astaghfirullah. Say a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. You do this thing that I know for your generation is really hard. It's called discipline and self-control. Wallahi, that is what's, and you want to know, we can ask anecdotally, what do sisters want? Do they want 6 foot, 6 figures, or do they want ambition and discipline? Do they care about beauty, or do they want ambition, discipline? I guarantee you, I've done this before in the gatherings much bigger than this. All of them are going to say ambition, discipline. You know why? Ambition and discipline means he'll be able to provide for me even when the going gets tough. Beauty, he may like shave his beard off and look ugly. And so I think what we need to do is fear Allah. If you don't want to go to Shadid, don't go to Shadid. That's too much for you. But when you go to work and Becky is there, treat her the same way you treat Fatima at the masjid. Because for some reason, we get around Becky and we like, yo, who's good, blah, blah, blah. But around Fatima, assalamu alaikum, sister, tafallah. That's an issue. That's a real issue. Because we're not going to talk about LA Fitness and Lorton. But anyways, I'm just saying. So we got to work on us.
I mean, can you give some pointers for what people should look for in a spouse when vetting a potential? So for either, right? I would say, let me make it simple. Like, there's 100 questions by Imam Majid,
Yep.
right? There's a lot of the, I would say, potential things that you're looking for in a spouse. He covers them very well. But what should you look for? Like, look for somebody who's religious. And religious in this, I don't mean religious in the sense that you're judging an individual's piety, but somebody who matches your religious wavelength, right? I think that's something that's really important. I've had young men ask me like, oh, is it okay if I marry, a young woman who doesn't wear a hijab? I'm like, okay, if she wears hijab, will you encourage her? Right? And like everybody's at a different stage spiritually. And you need somebody who's going to match that spiritual energy, because when you have a stark contrast, what happens is the person who is more religious is always going to feel burdened by the one who's less religious, and the one who's less religious is always going to feel judged by the one who's more religious. So I think having that spiritual wavelength match is something that's really important. And there, like I said, I just use Imam Majid's thing. I think that's
I wrote a blog post called Halal Riz. If you Google Halal Riz merchant, you'll find it. But I think we all need to define for ourselves what our non-negotiables are. What are we looking for?
Yeah.
And you find out what you're looking for, because, okay, is religiosity based on externals or piety? I know plenty of non-hijabi women that fast every Monday and Thursday and get up for tahajjud. It's like, wait, what? Like, I do a khatam Quran, multiple every Ramadan. It's like, what? You hardly wear hijab. I know plenty of guys that don't wear thobes that are really good guys, that are like stand-up gentlemen. Yeah. And so you need to figure out what are your non-negotiables. What are things that you cannot live without? Those should ideally be 5 or less, realistically. They should be summed up into 5 really good things, and look for those. And let that be the criterion that you use to pick who you're looking for.
Why do men and women pray segregated? I got asked this by an American friend. I don't know how to answer. Because of the nature of men and women, right? Would you as a woman be comfortable like bowing down and bending over in front of a man? Right? Like, it is. I think, I would say because of the nature of the prayer, it makes sense on why men pray in front and why women pray behind. My hair mask has pork in it. Can I use it?
I'm not a fiqhi.
No, you cannot.
Advice for a convert Muslimah looking to get married but has no wali, or their father isn't a Muslim and cannot vet proper Islamically. Alhamdulillah, Sharia helps us with this. Go talk to your local imam. Ideally someone that you know and trust. If you don't have a local imam, I mean, you should, but have someone that is honorable and respectful, that knows you well and is going to look out for your best interests, and have them, inshallah. But ideally, you go to the imam and say, listen, I'm trying to get married. Can you help me? Can you represent me? And then if it's one of us, we're going to ask you a very frank question. Am I a formality, or do you really want a wali? If I'm a formality, khalas, then I don't care. I'll help you get married. But if you really want me to be the wali, then I'm going to treat you like I treat my daughter or my sister, and I'm going to vet this dude.
What do you advise for couples whose partners deals with the opposite gender due to their occupation, even texting after work about work, but may sway? Does it go beyond that? Or the conversation may sway in different ways, whatever the case might be. Set some boundaries with your spouse, right? So whether it be a husband to the wife or the wife to the husband, all right, what are your non-negotiables? What are you not comfortable with? right? And that's something that's an important conversation. This is a conversation I usually have before couples get married. I'm like, okay, well, he's a salesman. He's going to deal with women. Are you okay with him going out for lunch with a potential client who's opposite gender? And this is not a shari'i discussion, right? This is a discussion on your own personal tolerances. Am I okay with that? Am I not okay with that? And if you're not okay with that, okay, does he agree or not? That's it, right? That's all the conversation boils down to. But if you are married, then just have a very, very clear conversation with him on the things that you're not comfortable with. And if there are things that you want to see from him, ask him. Be like, okay, hey, is it okay if you show me those conversations? Or like, I'm feeling very insecure about this, like, in the level of conversation that you're having with them. Or be like, hey, listen, after 8 p.m., please don't text anyone or please don't interact with anyone. Like, these are very frank conversations that need to happen between the two spouses.
I can't tell when men are flirting, so I don't know when to cut the conversation short. How do I keep this interaction limited? God bless you and protect you.
I mean,
if you feel uncomfortable, if he starts asking questions or doing things that you're uncomfortable with, that's when red flags should start going up.
It's not your job to judge anybody's intention. Mm-hmm. It's just your job to judge your own comfort level. And if you're not comfortable, close. Stop the engagement.
And that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you either.
No, not at all.
I mean, yeah.
Because you're judging your own comfort.
Yeah.
And everybody has different comfort levels. How do you express to someone that you're interested in them and want to move forward officially? Am I supposed to teach you guys how to spit game, man?
This is from a sister.
It's from a sister? Oh, okay.
It may be from them too, but.
Okay. I mean, I think for women that are forward in this,
ideally both should go through a third party.
Yeah.
Ideally. It helps save your honor and your face. It helps them say, both men and women, if you're interested, find a friend who knows a friend and they can ask anonymously, hey, what do you think about Fulana? Or what do you think about Fulana? Are you interested in married? We do this all the time. But yes.
Not because we want to. Public, purposeful, and precise. What about family social gatherings where you're expected to interact and be friendly? How are you supposed to navigate that? Smiling, laughing, is it flirting? If that's your intention, yes, it is. If it's not, then it's not. Right? You're being friendly.
Every gathering is going to be different.
Yeah.
And the closer you are with these people, the more comfortable you'll be. Me and Sheikh Farhan go back 10 years. I've known his wife before his first kid was born. When our family, and he's known my wife he's known me longer than I've been married. And he's known my wife the entire time. When we go over each other's house, sometimes we may just sit with each other, and sometimes we go off to the side and do our own thing. Because we're close family friends. If I don't know you that well, the women are going to sit on one side, the men are going to sit on the other side. You won't come over. But that's a different conversation. And so you have to figure out what your level of comfortability is and what the standards are going to be for you and your family. Now, if you're, again, unable to control yourself, you are overcome by beauty of this person and you can't lower your gaze and you're just gawking, then the issue's with you and just remove yourself from that environment.
Why isn't polygamy for women? There are a number of reasons. One reason could be ta'abbudi, right? This is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordained, and we don't know the exact wisdom and reasoning behind it. There are other reasons that were historical, at least up until now, where that you didn't know who the father was, right? If a woman had multiple partners. Other reasons include the nature of the woman, right? Women are not polyamorous by nature in general versus men, which statistically tend to be more polyamorous than women.
Economic reasons.
I'm sorry?
Economic reasons.
Economic reasons too. Men tend to be, like, at least in Islam, like it's very patriarchal in the sense of men's responsibility, and that they are Islamically expected to provide, and it's not expected from women. And I'm sure there are other reasons. Wallahu a'lam. Did any of the Sahaba commit zina? Women companions stoned to death. So there are two. There's Imra al-Ghamidiyya. So there's a woman from the Ghamidi tribe who we know for sure did, because she came forward and she confessed. The other one is Ma'iz. He was also stoned to death, and the third one I don't recall right now. But yeah, one of them was a woman.
How can Imam help me get married? Do I give him a list of what I'm looking for? The reality is we come across a lot of people. Those that are going to usually take priority in our minds are those that are like our students. People that are coming to all of our classes, people that we have a relationship with. When someone else comes and is like, I'm looking for a sister like this, I'm not going to think of that one sister I met one time a year ago who gave me her list. I may, but generally speaking, I'm not. I'm going to think, okay, who are my students? Okay, sisters, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
And the inverse applies to brothers. So if you want an imam to help you and genuinely help you, go to his classes, ask questions afterwards, not for the intention of getting married. That's just a byproduct that's going to happen. How do I stop myself from getting jealous of people in haram relationships?
Look for a halal relationship, right? If you're looking for meaning in other people's relationships, there's a big problem there, right? Look for meanings in your relationships.
What is it in, I think this is a good point of introspection. What is it about the haram relationships that you're actually jealous of? Are you jealous of the fact they have someone and you don't? Are you jealous of the fact that they're being intimate and you're not? Are you jealous of the fact that they pontificate online and make you think that they're actually enjoying this relationship? Wallahi al-azim.
Which is like a majority of them.
Wallahi al-azim. I did marriage counseling for an influencer couple for 5 years that would call me cussing each other out. And 30 minutes later, be cheesing on the gram. And I would call them like, are you guys serious?
I have family just like that. Like crazy popular. And you wouldn't even know, right? Like if you met with them, it's like they don't even talk at home. But they're running, like they're doing like their dance routines and whatnot, or whatever the case might be.
So I think we need to check we need to ask ourselves, what are we jealous of to begin with? And then recognize that our jealousy is an internal thing. That's on us. And can we reprioritize or what it is that we're looking at? But also, perhaps we should get off the different avenues that allow us to be jealous to begin with.
Yeah. If I make more money than a potential, as a female, should I be expected to provide and pay 50-50? No, you shouldn't. But if you are putting the entire financial burden on your husband, as is your right, then he has a right to set the budget.
He has a right to what?
Set the budget. Is having a homeboy haram with the intention of friendship only? I don't believe men and women can be friends.
No, not happening. I'm not trying to be weird, but I burped in public and this Muslim man looked at me with disgust. Am I being modest? Can I be blessed from this? Can I think I was getting blessed from this? So this is a cultural thing. And I think as times have changed, we've just been more comfortable. One of our old co-workers in Mecca, he told me for the first 14 years of his marriage, he never farted in front of his wife. I was like, what? He said, 14 years.
For me, it was like 14 minutes.
Right? And so, again, culture changes. What is acceptable, what's not. But I also think for men and women, we can learn like better ways of decorum, of conducting ourselves. It's disrespectful. It's, forget modest, but it's just not a very cultural thing for both men or women burping in public. And in fact, I've been in Eastern countries where men did that, they all looked down upon. Everyone was like, this guy's no training, no home training. Yeah, Laura. Oh, part 1.
Oh, you can do parts?
No, but this person's maximizing this app.
Oh, okay.
Part 1, I have a lot of experience with dating. And over time, I became accustomed to the crudeness that often comes with haram relationships. Where's part 2? Where's part 2? It's like TikTok or Instagram.
Yeah, let's go. What is this, like Twitter? Bro?
I want the other one. There's 3 parts. Allahu Akbar.
How do you organize them?
Oh, part 2. While I deeply desire a halal relationship, I've come to realize the concept the perfect hijab girl feels almost too innocent or idealistic for me. Don't say anything yet. They often seem too vanilla for me. How can I find the right partner who meets high Islamic standards without feeling like they're out of touch with reality? I think, if I'm being honest, because this is a brother, you're a bit out of touch with reality.
Damn.
I'm just being honest, right? Like
I agree with you, but still,
you started off by saying, I have a lot of experience.
Well, what if they're a revert?
Still, don't look for the perfect ideal Muslim girl who's been raised in the utopian Muslim situation and expect her to be down and dirty like the non-Muslim women that you spent all your time with. No, of course not you. He's like, I don't even want to get married, bro. Leave me out of this. And so if that's the case, we're finding that our expectations are unrealistic or not even probable, then maybe we should try to change our expectations. And then also recognize what is actually important for establishing a home, a family, for the future of my children. And if we can do that, there's something that, again, is very difficult for us to accept. We can train how we think. You can recondition yourself. You've only seen video vixens and now you need to say, no, that's not good. You can train yourself by not thinking about that and not looking at those things and recognizing what are my priorities and what do I want. And then slowly, inshallah, you'll have that. Another thing that we can do is sacrifice for the sake of Allah. I wanted all these things, but I recognize this is not good for me. That's like someone who says, I love to drive really fast, but I keep getting all these tickets. Okay, maybe you don't drive as fast, or you go to the track. And it's better for you because you'll have less tickets. So, wallah alam.
I actually read an interesting statistic recently. It was about sexual satisfaction in marriage. So it's not related to how long, it's not related to orgasms. You know what is it related to? I'm sorry?
There are kids here.
Oh, I mean, there probably shouldn't be. But like, I mean, the topic is pretty clear, dude. It wasn't related to length or any of those things. It was related to cuddling after intimacy. I was so surprised.
Why?
Like, I think because for men it's very physical, for women it's more emotional.
Of course.
And the moment that there is proximity after intimacy is done, it doesn't, like one person doesn't feel used, right? And they feel like that person is still important to them, and that proximity helps bring that. It was just a really interesting statistic that I had come across, and I think that's something that's really important and has to do with this idea of perspective that you were talking about, and being in touch with reality and understanding what that is.
In India, women from all religions dress modestly, but men don't lower their gaze as instructed. They do a lot worse than that, unfortunately, in a lot of the world. A lot of the world, we're not going to stereotype Indians or subcontinents. How can
okay. I'm Indian, bro. I'm allowed to.
You're Muhajir. How can how can modesty be implemented without oppressive women? Again, I think this is the key, that it's not actually. This is the problem with society. When colonialism and modernity started to come about, we externalized the responsibility. And so women had to act a certain way and men were just allowed to be heathens. That's not cool either. Modesty is actually how we interact with each other. Yeah. And it should, and just because someone is religious or has a beard or whatever doesn't mean that they can do unmodest things. It doesn't mean they can act inappropriately, and they're going to be held accountable by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That being said, just because men may be heathens in certain categories or the inverse is the situation, we have to check ourselves. So that just because men are savages doesn't mean that women should start acting immodest, or just because women are very flirtatious and immodest doesn't mean men should just become savages. Hold on.
How do you keep your marriage exciting so your eyes don't wander? I mean, as a guy, your eyes are always going to wander. Like, you just do the best that you can to control yourself. It's not your wife's responsibility to control your modesty. It's your personal responsibility. I will say is that what women can do to help their husbands is like keep their emotional cups full. I think that's something that's really important. How do you keep his cup full? By he has to be very vulnerable and very honest in the things that he wants from the relationship, right? If there's a certain type of attention that he wants and he seeks, well, he has to tell her, right? It doesn't mean that she's always going to be able to provide it. That's not necessarily the case. Like, I have 5 kids. Abdulmalik you have 6 kids now, right?
7.
Yeah, 7, mashallah. Like, you have 7 kids. Like, I can want my wife to meet me at the door all the time. I can want her to constantly give me attention, and I can ask for those things. Like, is it a realistic ask? You know what I mean? Like, and I think many men, alhamdulillah, are still understanding of that, but they should still make it clear the things that they're looking for so that that emotional cup, it might not reach the brim, but it'll still get high enough where it will help them from being distracted.
I think another really practical thing is healthy communication. Like, I was going to talk about this earlier, but I didn't. True love is only possible when we're willing to risk pain. A lot of us sacrifice genuine love for mere comfort. And if we're willing to be in pain, we're willing to risk it to have real love, that means we need to communicate. What would you like for me to do? What would make you happy? This goes in both ways, not just male or female. What would make you happy? How would you like for me to communicate with you? What things would make you more comfortable? And then how can we meet in the middle to make each other happy?
when you said your eyes will wander, so do men just always look for things in women outside who they're with? So there's a difference between your eye wandering and your heart wandering, right? Right. Just because I own a particular type of car and I like other types of cars, it doesn't mean that this isn't the one that I want to be with, or this isn't the one that I want to drive, right? And I know some of you might feel it's a crude example, but the reality is that I'm with my wife, right? She's the one that I chose. She's the one that I wanted. And even if a person's eyes do wander or he sees other things, well, who does he want to go home with, right? Who does he want to spend his life with? Who does he want to have children with? Who does he want to raise them with, right? Who does he want? Like, he wants her, regardless of what he sees and where he looks.
That doesn't excuse
it doesn't excuse
recklessness
it,
on behalf of the men, obviously. I think, and I've seen this in our counseling sessions, that women can get very fixated on what he's looking at, particularly if it's an innocent look. Like, a beautiful woman walked by and he's like, oh, and he caught himself. Because I promise you, unless he's an idiot, men are not gawking next to their wife. Yeah. And so, that being said, just because he recognized beauty in the world doesn't mean that now he wants to go leave you and be with them. We have to separate the two.
And a little bit of grace too, I think, is important, right? Like, if your husband is gawking, then that's something that needs to be addressed, right? Like, you need to talk to him about that. Be like, hey, listen, that's like totally inappropriate. But if it's something that happened to catch his eye, or something he happened to be looking in that direction, a little bit of grace, right? Like, I think a little bit of mercy is something that's really important, and like being forgiving, right? Like, if I'm not forgiving with my husband, then my husband is going to be less forgiving with me, right? And it doesn't have to be in the same thing, because like I said, men and women are motivated by different things.
If a guy discloses that he's not a virgin, but you are, as a woman, is that enough reason to not move forward in a relationship? You have to answer that for yourself. You and your family should ask yourselves, is that okay for you? For some people, due to their shyness, due to their cultural background, due to many different things, that is a non-negotiable.
Or their personal prerogative,
Personal
right?
prerogative, whatever. Yeah. That's a no-go. Some people are like, whatever, no problem. Yeah. You figure out what that is, and you define it. And there's no shame either way. I have non-Muslim female cousins who try to hug me.
Okay.
What is permissibility of this? Would denying their hug push them away from Islam?
I mean, it depends on the situation, right? As long as you're not initiating, right? Sometimes it's better to brace for impact. And there are, and meaning this, like, if it's happening like the first time, you do your best to be like, hey, listen, I'm not comfortable, or I've started practicing, and this is not something I engage in anymore. If they don't respect that, then they're not respecting your boundaries, right? And that's something that's important. But if somebody comes and maybe you hadn't been practicing before and you just started practicing now, and they come and like, they just come and they give you a hug, you don't push anybody off, right? That's rude and that's insulting. But you can have a conversation. You can explain to them like where you stand on it.
Also, bracing for impact can mean you get a half hug, you get a shoulder. Like, let's be real. Like, you don't have to be like, come on here. Like,
yeah.
This is a good one. Is falling in love with someone you decide to marry, and we're supposed to stop soon, I'm sure. Is falling in love with someone you decide to marry an okay goal for marriage? I've had this convo. It was said they don't want that, as love is only for Allah.
Oh, wow.
So this is two different questions. We're going to do the theological first. Love being only for Allah.
That is...
Yes, ideally, objective love is saved for God. But human love is what we see the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ saying, I was just to all my wives, but I love Aisha. It's what you see the Prophet ﷺ loving Khadija so much that after she passed, he went and visited and took gifts to her friends. That's love. Love is when you're on the battlefield, are ready to go out for war, tell the army to go forward, embrace your wife so she's not worried. That's very human love. Love is that we say that Aisha would wash the Prophet ﷺ's hair when he's in i'tikaf, sticking his head through the door. Love is when the Prophet ﷺ is messing with Aisha and pokes her in her stomach and says, you got a little chubby. That's love. From the best of creation, who loved his wives, plural. That being said, should you love prior to marriage or after marriage? The heart is a very fickle thing. You could be courting in the most halal way, father's always present, only meet up once a week, whatever possible way. The courting phase is 2 months long, and you can fall in love. It's very possible. Is that haram? Absolutely not. Do you have to control yourself more? Absolutely. You've been married for 5 years and there's just no spark. Guess what? You can still fall in love. Stop your expectations, stop looking at other things, invest in your spouse, recognize the goodness in them, appreciate that, communicate that you appreciate those things in them, and then do things that they like so that you guys can foster those those feelings with each other and sacrifice for one another, and then go through some more difficulty and you realize, man, this person been here the whole time, this person hold me down. That's true love. So is love only for God? No. The Prophet ﷺ loved his wives. He was jealous of his wives, ﷺ. When he walked with them and he saw the Prophet ﷺ walking with, Innaha Safiya. That's my wife Safiya. Don't even try. That's my wife. When the ifk of Aisha radiallahu anha, the slander of Aisha radiallahu anha happened, it hurt him emotionally. They're slandering his wife in public. Love is not a problem. It's a human emotion. It's a good emotion. How will we love to love the Creator, subhanahu wa ta'ala, if we haven't even learned how to love other human beings? Yeah. Why is the Prophet ﷺ called Habibullah, the beloved of God?
Even the Prophet ﷺ said about himself, like your iman is not complete until you love me. You love me.
The Prophet ﷺ said your iman is not complete until you love me more than everything else. Matter of fact, when he told that to Umar radiallahu anh, and Umar said, I love you more than everyone in the dunya except myself. The Prophet ﷺ said, not yet, go. You haven't loved enough yet. So this is what the Prophet ﷺ, another human being. What about your spouse is holding you down every single day? The spouse is cooking for you and taking care of you and with you when you're sad and with you when you're happy. Are we only focused on like, oh man, they didn't dress up the way I wanted to dress?
And love is a spectrum, right? It's important to keep that in mind. And it doesn't have to be equal. If I love my wife level 7 and she loves me level 4, that's fine, right? And not just that, there are times where I'm going to love her more and there are times where I love her less. And it's very natural. And love is something that develops. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, subhanAllah, and it's amazing when He says about وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا. He talks about 3 things. لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, right? To seek tranquility in her. وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مُوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. Muwadda, a lot of people translate as love. I translate it as affection.
Yeah.
Right? To come close together and to place mercy. And if I find peace in this person and I find affection from this person and I find mercy in this person, well, guess what follows? Love. Because I would say the lowest part or the lowest spectrum of love is not wanting the other person to get hurt. Right? I would say like that's probably the lowest. And there's nothing wrong with that. And the highest part of it is like, wanting to always be around that person, like maybe even levels of infatuation. And that's fine. Like I said, it doesn't have to be equal. And it doesn't, like wherever it is on that spectrum, as long as it's there, that's all that matters.
But even that, how we express love does not define our love. One person may be very external with their expressions of love, while the other person may be very serving in how they express love. And the one who's very external with it in like affection and gift giving, all those things, doesn't necessitate that they love more than the person who serves. And we also have to recognize that we're going to express loves in different ways. And then how do we appreciate each other with that? One is more affectionate or needs affection, so they're clingy and huggy and lovey-dovey, with the other one's like, I'm going to serve. How do we appreciate that about each other? And give the one who needs the affection that, and then allow the other person to serve, and recognizing that in each. Wallahu alam. Jazakumullah khair. We've gone over time. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all.
Ameen.
Allow us to find true love and happiness in a halal way in this life, soon, not later, that's good for us, that earns Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us and allow us to be modest people. People that find comfort and contentment in modesty. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us when the society is working against us. Again, don't forget your brothers and sisters in Palestine, in Sudan, in Syria, in Lebanon, everywhere that we're going through difficulty and hardship, and use them as an example for us to learn what our potential as human beings is. Wallahu alam.
If you want to be added to the group chat, come find me. I'll provide you with the name.
If you are married in this room, show some affection to your spouse tonight.